On January 11th, 2005, Resident Evil 4 finally released. Shinji Mikami got tired of the game being in development hell, so he decided to see to it himself that this game would just get released already.
Resident Evil 4 will be scary than ever before. Don't pee your pants.
He wrote the game's story in 3 weeks, ditching the overambitious multi-character narratives in favor of a basic Bush-era inspired Leon saves the princess from terrorists for America type of story. I know it turned out great, you know it turned out great, but this isn't a series about reviewing Resident Evil 4. It's a series about documenting how all 3 games stemming from its prototypes feed off of and seep into one another. So with that being said, let's talk about everything from Devil May Cry, Haunting Ground, and the prior prototypes that made it into the final release. First off, we have the camera system that was seen evolving from a Devil May Cry / Haunting Ground dynamic camera that we talked about in the first episode being really important for the developers, to the behind the shoulder angle used in the final game in the Hallucination and Hookman builds. So this evolution from that Devil May Cry era Resident Evil 4 type of camera to the final product can be seen in these 2 builds here. I'll show the footage of it right now. You can see that when Leon's walking around, it still uses that very Devil May Cry / Haunting Grounds type camera, but whenever he starts to aim down and shoot, we see that over the shoulder perspective, and that will get more and more reinforced until we get to the final game where you're just constantly behind Leon or Ashley's shoulders. Leon went from this to this thanks to Dante. We've gone over before how the idea of Tony Redgrave changed the Resident Evil protagonist standards forever moving forwards. So Leon can thank Dante for having such a hardcore fan base, thinking that he's so cool in Resident Evil 4 with his one-liners and suplexes and stylish moves, because without Dante, Leon would still be that twerp from the RPD.
Big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
I mentioned or showed very briefly when talking about shared assets between Resident Evil 4 and Haunting Ground that hewie was shared for the dog textures in both games. While the barking sounds pretty different in Resident Evil 4 and Haunting Ground respectively, this is, from the ground up, literally just hewie. Hewie gets carried over, and we know that this goes way beyond just being hewie. This goes all the way back to Sugimura's version of Resident Evil 4 having some BOW-infused dog, which would help out whatever girl was trapped in the castle.
Hey, it's that dog.
Hell, even the whole idea of BOW-infused dogs still shows up in-game, when you have to deal with Salazar's pets in his little maze back there. If you've watched either of the previous 2 videos, you'll know that one of the most prominent concepts with Resident Evil 4 in respect to its development throughout all of its different story iterations was the idea of Leon getting infected with some sort of virus. This carries over into the final game. Both Leon and Ashley end up getting infected with Las Plagas. However, unlike the original versions where they were supposed to develop superpowers, instead in this game here, it's more of a crux and a timer, an issue that Leon and Ashley have to solve and get rid of before it overtakes them, which, even though it deviates from the original intention of superpowers and all of that, adds a lot of tension to the game and the narrative. So that's one change that I'm kind of happy to see happen. I mentioned again in the Haunting Grounds video how Fiona kind of served as a prototype version of Ashley. But a lot of what makes Fiona still carries over into Ashley. Their designs, their mannerisms, the basic premise of having to escape from captors that pursue them, hell, even their background of being college students being brought into this creepy, otherworldly situation remains the same. Looking back on the prototype builds, we can see that a lot of enemy types ended up being cut from the game. That being the creepy dolls that would end up attacking Leon, a concept that would show up later on in Resident Evil 8. However, if there's one enemy type that was in Resident Evil 4 from very close to the beginning, it would be the idea of these suits of armor, these knights that would come to life and attack you. We can see this all the way back in the Hallucination and Hookman builds of the game. While enemy puppets were definitely cut out of Resident Evil 4, creepy puppets do make an appearance in a trap room in Haunting Ground, and in Devil May Cry, one of the main enemy types are puppet type enemies. So, don't feel too bad, that idea still got used elsewhere before Resident Evil 8. On the note of talking about things in Devil May Cry, the whole idea of Leon being able to level up his guns shares eerie similarity to the way that you can level up Dante, purchase items, and get his weapons in the original Devil May Cry. So that whole idea of being able to level yourself up and get stronger as you play through the game, rather than picking up weapons that you just happen to find throughout the map, or finding different pieces of better weapons, carries over from Devil May Cry. The only other thing of note that I can think to bring up in this video would be again the plethora of assets moved over from Haunting Ground to Resident Evil 4, and vice versa. Specifically, if there's one thing I want to bring up, it's the whole prevalence of spike traps, castle traps, and different rooms that can kill you when you enter them. Although this is a very Resident Evil concept stemming all the way back to the first game, some of the designs of the traps in this game really do remind me of Haunting Ground.
Maybe some other time.
In conclusion, many games have troubled and interesting developing cycles, but it's not every day that the development of one game leads to 3 unique games being made. The 6th generation of consoles brought about so many possibilities for what games could be. The development of Resident Evil 4 showed how even a single concept could split into multiple finished projects. It's a prime example of why game design is so interesting. That's why I made this series, to illustrate the fluid nature of game development exemplified by Resident Evil 4's creation. Devil May Cry, Haunting Ground, and Resident Evil 4. All amazing games, and all 3 of a kind.